we just need to change, to shift the game and have more young people interested in science, especially in Africa. Yeah. We have not done enough to develop our science, so there's ample space for everyone. And I want to encourage especially young female scientists to come in through the ranks. Yeah. I got a call from the editor of Nature Medicine. And for me, it woke up in me a sense that what we are doing is making a difference, even within this setup. And from there on, of course, I rushed to talk to my students, say, you know what, guys, we seem to be doing something the world is noticing. Yeah. I have this philosophy that I might not be able to make a difference, in science. I could make a contribution, but perhaps I might not win a Nobel Prize. Yeah. But I always believe that my students could win a Nobel Prize. I see in young people a bright future, and I tell my students that, I don't want you to achieve what I've achieved. If you achieve what I've achieved, you would have failed. My host at Hampton University was actually my former student who did their PhD here at the University of Venda. I'm probably the first person in both these institutions to bring protein research and to some degree what we call molecular biology skills. I think professorship now is synonymous with gray hairs. And sometimes I think it puts off young people because they're thinking, okay, it takes me to gray before I could become a professor. Yeah. And I think it's not a perfect model of this career, right? You could be young and make a difference as a scientist. And I think if you don't want to be bored, this is the career to be. 90% of what you have to do must be done here because this is our home. Yeah. Use the resources that we have to answer the questions that are important for the community that we serve. Yeah. We have seen in the past a lot of collaborations between the North and Southern partners that sometimes that are not equal. For example, in Africa, we have a diverse range of infectious diseases. Yeah. Someone wants to come to Africa, collaborate with you because they want to access your resources that you can get from the community, which is okay. But I think it's important to negotiate and say, what is in there for me as well? Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important for us as Africans to start collaborating on equal basis with our partners. Yeah.
Good day and welcome to another episode of Pfunzo NJE. My name is Makhaga. I'm going to be your host for today. Today we're going to be having an explosive engagement with Professor Addmore Shonhai, who is coming from the Department of Microbiology and Biochemistry under the Faculty of Science, Engineering and Agriculture right here at the University of Venda. We're not talking about Prof. Shonhai. We're talking about someone who's not just a scientist. We're talking about a globally recognized researcher. We're talking about a mentor and scientific leader whose work focuses on understanding infectious organisms such as malaria parasites and how they survive under stressful conditions. He's also, or was also elected a fellow of the Royal Society of South Africa, which is a significant honor in the scientific community. Prof, good day and welcome to Pfunzo NJE.
Thank you so much, Vhuhwavho, for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. I think it's very important when people are having engagements or conversation to just start with understanding who I'm with here. If you were to explain or to describe yourself to somebody out there, how would you describe yourself?
Thank you. So I am a very humble person, someone from a very humble background. I grew up, I was born and grew up in Zimbabwe, just across the border here to the south of Zimbabwe. And then I studied at the National University of Science and Technology in Zimbabwe again, before doing my PhD at Rhodes University in South Africa, where I became interested in protein research and chose the path of academia and research to pursue my dream. Perhaps that sums it up.
Thank you so much. You're saying that, humble beginnings, a humble person also. Let's talk about, more on your academic journey. Academic journeys begin, for different people, some would say that, in high school, in university. Let's talk about you. Looking back, what would you say has shaped the scientist you are today? Where did that emerge?
So that's a very interesting question. I think I got to enjoy science in high school. I had a very motivating science teacher in high school. He was Mr. Munyenyo. He taught especially the life sciences with a lot of zeal. And I remember that it was very easy for him to influence the whole class to become interested in science. And so I think that is where my interest actually grew. I then went on to university, determined to do science from there on. Yeah.
Today you are described as a scientist. I'm pretty sure maybe when you're still in high school in the classroom, you're just thinking, maybe it would be interesting to study science, but not necessarily to say, I'm dedicating my life to science. At what point did you actually realize, I want to do this forever and study some more and study some more?
So I think for me, it was a gradual process. When I finished university, I had the opportunity to work for, so I had two workplaces where I actually developed more of the practical science aspects of science. I worked for a University of Florida run project, which was working on vaccine research in cows, in ruminants, including cows. So that was quite an interesting adventure, from university to working on vaccines.
Yeah.
That to me was actually very, very instrumental to igniting that interest, And then I went on to work for a pharmaceutical company where I was actually working on the quality control side. So these two workplaces honed my skills, especially on the practical side of science, to the extent that I still think that, so science involves abstract thinking and the practical side. I developed my practical skills in those two workplaces, which helped me subsequently to use them in actually answering crucial science questions over the course of time in my development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about theory and practicals,
Right.
when we read things in theory, it sounds very easy. It sounds simple and sounds like, I can just wake up tomorrow and start doing this.
Right.
In science, how would you say the theoretical part is different from the practical part?
So I think that, so when I teach my students, I always say to them, I teach you the way I wish I were taught. Because I think we make a big mistake of making science look like a theoretical subject. Well, science is actually very practical. I think from the onset, if you teach science, you need to make it very practical. Okay, so you can't always run a practical with your class, but I think it's important when you teach science to remind your students that we are talking about things either that form part of their own system. Human beings are scientific products, if you want. Everything around us is scientific in some way. So it's very easy to relate what you teach. Even if it's abstract, you can easily make it very practical. If you can make it relatable from a practical point of view, it makes it easy. And I always argue with my students that I don't think I need someone that has a serious background in science in order to teach them science.
Yeah.
Anyone can become a scientist, essentially, because it's practical. We can touch scientific aspects, we can feel them, so it's very easy to teach science in a way, or even to make it practical.
Yeah, absolutely understandable. That's why we're here today.
Yeah.
We want to try to understand the science. You are a professor in biochemistry and microbiology. And right now we can say that, you have extended your work into drug discovery. So from those without a scientific background, what exactly is it that you study? Why does it matter? And actually, who stands to benefit from the work that you do?
Yeah, so my interest is in proteins. And I study what are called heat shock proteins. These are proteins that help others to find their shape. So perhaps let me just start by saying that proteins are molecules that we produce in the body that have to find their shape before they can function. If they lose their shape, they also lose their function. So they are produced in the body, and they have to find their fold. But that process needs other proteins to help them. So in other words, almost the same way as we deal with children that are developing, that we need a safe space for them to develop before they can get onto the street and make a difference. So we have what we call heat shock proteins, or so, in general, they're also called molecular chaperones. They engulf proteins when they are produced to give them the space to find their fold before they can be released for function. If these proteins were to be released before they find their function, their fold, then they become seeds of disorder in the cell. They associate with other molecules in the cell, causing cellular disharmony. And so there are many protein misfolding diseases. And in the same way, we study these proteins in parasites. So our goal is to disrupt the custodians of protein folding in parasites, in malaria parasites, so that the proteins that they produce may not find fold, hence they become dysfunctional, so that we can stop the parasites from replicating. That's essentially the goal of what we do.
Yeah. So, you know, as a scientist, if you're walking around in the street and we say, no, this guy's a scientist, people are going to look at you. Oh, it means that, you know, complicated jargons and probably stuff that an ordinary person would not understand. You know, what is it that you guys see as scientists, you know, specifically focusing on your research and whatever it is that, or however you just describe it now, what is it that ordinary people don't see when you look at, you know, diseases such as malaria?
So I think what the ordinary people don't always realize is that, if you look at it from a medical point of view, because malaria is a medical problem, you know, what a lot of people can relate to are nurses and doctors and maybe the pharmacy, you know, where they can go to get medicines and so forth. But perhaps what people don't realize is that there are years of effort by several people that guide the process of inventing a drug, for example, that gets prescribed by your doctor. And that effort that is put in is actually put in by scientists, you know, who basically are people who are seeking the question, how would we stop this problem from being, for example, a medical issue? And they commit so much time, sometimes asking very basic questions before we can actually lead, for example, to say, here is a drug. And that takes a lot of time and effort. And I think that time and effort is not always appreciated, because scientists are essentially, in that regard, the guys behind the scenes, and you know, that nobody seems to care about sometimes.
Yeah, being the guy behind the scenes, I think you're actually right about that, because I think people usually just wait for the drug to be introduced. We don't really necessarily care about the work that's happening in the laboratory. Do you think people should start caring about what the work that's happening in the laboratory, and why?
I think we should put more effort in that. And I think this could actually explain why especially Africa lags behind. That we have not actually removed the veil to understand how science could make the difference. And we know that in Europe and the Western world, advancement in technology has been on account of scientific discoveries. And sometimes, unfortunately, we even push our scientists in the third world to say, give us a product tomorrow, which is not always possible, because you need years of investment, or let me just say you need huge effort before you can actually get to apply the scientific discoveries that you would have found. So at some point, we are going to need to make a serious commitment, you know, to investing in science, and maybe to remove the veil between the public and the scientists, so that we can interact better, communicate better, maybe even reduce the use of the jargon that you have just referenced, which is a problem, because then we have scientists speaking a different language from that of the public. I think we need to kind of bridge that gap.
If we are talking about science and we refer it back to specifically in South Africa, high schools, most learners actually want to shy away from, you know, doing science and so forth. If you were to explain your work, specifically maybe let's say a grade 9, grade 10 learner who's beginning to think about their future career, how would you describe the work that you do? And maybe just to try to squash the stigma against, or rather stigma on, science is very difficult and, it's very hard. You won't necessarily excel in science. How would you, go about that?
So perhaps I'll start by saying the beauty about a career in science is that every day is different. We essentially just wake up to a day of discovery.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a better way to live your life than to be asking questions and finding answers to them every day, even if the answers are not what you wanted. So sometimes we run our studies and we get findings that we didn't expect, and we live with that. But science is a lot of adventure. So I would encourage someone young in grade 9, for example, to pursue a career in science, especially at this stage for several reasons. Yeah. With advancement in artificial intelligence and the way the world has gotten technological, we can only see more and more application of science in the future. When I was in high school, if I remember, the best careers were in accounting, business, and commerce, and so forth. Yeah. I think that has shifted now. Today, science is the thing to pursue. Yeah. And there are many dimensions in science. There's the life science, the physical, the engineering side, and so forth. You need to find your niche. You need to kind of figure out, where do I feel comfortable? Yeah. But there's always something to contribute from those various dimensions. And I would encourage today that we just need to change, to shift the game and have more young people interested in science, especially in Africa. Yeah. We have not done enough to develop our science. So there's ample space for everyone. And I want to encourage especially young female scientists to come in through the ranks.
Yeah. So if we are talking about, Africa, like you just mentioned, somebody is going to think Africa science resources. So it means that, we can't shy away from the fact that, we have, still developing countries in Africa, and there is a limited resource problem. Much of your career, we can say that it involves around that research, and you might experience issues of, limited research problem. What is it that you'd say, or how is it that you'd say you maneuver around your research with the problem of limited resources, and also incorporating that, with the young ones that would consider studying science, and they would say that, but we don't have resources in Africa. Why should I study science?
Thank you. I think you bring something that is a conundrum. So the lack of resources obviously undermines development of science. You could also, then, lack of development of science also promotes a constant lack of resources. Because if you could start somewhere and build some kind of scientific project as a country, for example, you'll be able to probably release that as a product that you can actually use to fuel your system in order to get more resources to support other ventures in science. So I think the problem with Africa is that we are not starting somewhere. And I must say, though, within this, I must also celebrate South Africa. It's probably the only country in Africa that I can imagine which is making a commitment to invest in science. I think the last time I checked, we were probably doing over 1% budget of the GDP towards science. Perhaps it's more now. So obviously, South Africa is doing something about it, and I think it's something to celebrate. But the beauty is that science is about ideas. I think before we talk about resources, let's probably look at ideas as resources by themselves. Yeah. So if you had this question, which is important to answer, and all of us have our brains, whether we may have money or not. Yeah. And I think if you have the right question to answer, you could make friends easily within the collaboration field. Yeah. There are people who have resources that you can work with, so you collaborate with them in order to unlock the issue around lack of resources. So I think it's important to talk to people that may be resourced in order to collaborate with them. Yeah. If you have a great idea, people are willing to partner with you. So I think it's important for African scientists to collaborate with those that have means as long as they are interested, because I think science, to make a career in science, you need to be dedicated.
Yeah.
The days are not always as promising, but you need to stay in the house, in the room, in order for the project to take off.
You need to stay in the lab.
Indeed.
Yeah, let's talk about you being now a global scientist. You know, over the past 9 months, you've spent time in the United States as a Fulbright scholar. There are some people that might not understand. What is it that we're talking about when we say Fulbright scholar? Please enlighten us.
So the Fulbright Scholar Program is organized and funded primarily by the United States government. And my understanding is that in the case of South Africa, the South African government also chips in. And essentially, this program started on the basis of educational exchange programs. And of course, you can't always have educational exchange programs without culture. So it's almost like an education cultural exchange program between the United States and nationalities from other countries. So it started way back. I just can't remember the year, but it's been around over many years. And essentially, the US uses it to interface with other nationalities from other countries on aspects of science, education, and of course, cultural dimensions as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about, you know, how you spent time in the United States, you know, as a Fulbright scholar. What is it that you'd say you were hoping to achieve? And, you know, what would you say such an opportunity was significant for you, the University of Venda, and also, importantly, African science?
Thank you. So for me, I wanted to take time. I had been an HOD for a long time, I think over 10 years before I got this opportunity. It was time to get out of the regular space a bit in order to write up my research, which I generated over the course of time with my students, and also to learn from another perspective different to my day-to-day, you know, about how other people do research, especially in the United States, where we know we got in the United States a global champion in research. It was important for me to go there, to interface with the community there, to learn from them. But it's also important to realize when you travel abroad that we often underestimate the fact that people can also learn from you, because the natural thought is that I'm going to be learning, but you are also carrying with you something from Africa that you can actually interface and share with others in that community. And so for me, that was a huge opportunity for which I'm very grateful to my employer, the University of Venda.
Yeah. I think we forgot one very important question. For you to become a Fulbright scholar, you know, what does it take for you to become recognized as a Fulbright scholar?
So from what I figured out through the selection process that I went through, I would like to probably also highlight two things. That it's so the Fulbright sponsors faculty, which are staff members, right, of universities. They also sponsor students, especially PhD students. So I want to emphasize students, because I think I don't want to make this sound like it's just for members of staff.
Yeah.
Students are also involved. In fact, there are more students going to the US on this program than faculty, than members of staff that take it.
Yeah.
And so the criteria, it appears to me that it's obviously your profile, especially as a researcher, that they're looking at, because essentially these are resources. And we know that when you have limited resources, you want to put them where it would count.
Yeah.
So I think you just need to build your CV. And I think for any young academic, I would say work on it, take your time, and then when the time is right, just submit your application. The application process is very straightforward. It's not cumbersome. In fact, I was surprised by how easy it is to submit the application.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So We talked about African science and how important it is to be a scientist in Africa. I'm pretty sure when you were there, it was a good opportunity for you to represent Africa as a whole, to represent the University of Venda, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. We can say that it was a responsibility that you were holding, or rather looking into. How were you conscious? How conscious were you of the responsibility that you had as an African scientist in the United States?
I was very conscious of that. So I had the opportunity to present my work at my host institution, which was Hampton University in Virginia. I then went to other institutions in the country. I think altogether I presented my work at 6 institutions in the United States.
Yeah.
In all those occasions, I almost represented. I took myself as representing Africa, representing South Africa. And so I had the flag flying at least on all my slides.
Yeah.
And also talking about the culture in the country, the cultural aspects of Africa, and how we deal with education, and also science in particular. And I would also talk about my work a little bit. So it was a bit of culture and science. And of course, unveiling the image of South Africa and Africa at large to the United States community.
Yeah, absolutely understandable. I'm pretty sure when you met other people, they were also, you were curious of, their cultures and their countries. What is it that people were most curious about? You coming from the University of Venda, and, did any of the interactions that you had challenge maybe some of the assumptions that people may have had or people do have about Africa as a whole?
So that's a very interesting question. To be honest, there were many questions people asked.
Yeah.
So perhaps I'll start off with the random question on the street, like when I was in an Uber and someone just asks, so you are from Africa? Are there cities in Africa? Also, you could come across someone just asking that question.
Yeah.
No, there are cities, right? Then there's also, when it comes to students, they were asking. So essentially, I think I introduced myself as doing science under resource constraint conditions. And the natural question was, how do you make that possible?
Yeah.
Because it must be quite difficult. I mean, a University of Venda is a seriously resource-constrained institution. And so when you do science in this community, I think it's something people really appreciate. And of course, they ask you, how do you do this? And in fact, it turned out that I was actually inspiring some of the students to say, I was trying to make their day lighter by saying, you can still do it. If I can do this under these conditions, you can do better here under these conditions that are more permissive. Then of course, I think the whole theme was around also malaria itself, which is not a big problem in the US, except perhaps if it's important through tourism.
Yeah.
So there were also questions around, in fact, I told people I suffered from malaria, and yeah, it made them stay a bit, to say, wow, here's a survivor of malaria.
Yeah.
So yeah, those were interesting conversations.
Yeah, I think it would also be an interesting story to hear for the viewers at home. You saying that, you also suffered from malaria. Would you say maybe that's something that also sparked your interest in actually, I must make sure that I study you and I must make sure that I bring about change? Maybe if you could just give us a bit of a highlight on your story.
I think it does get personal a little bit. I think when I was a young boy, I probably had about 3-4 episodes of malaria. It's commonplace it's very endemic where I come from. And so malaria is a very interesting disease in the sense that it gives you fever conditions. And so you feel hot, and the next hour you are very cold. So you keep asking, if you get so sick, you are lying on a bed, you constantly ask people to move and change your environment because of that. So it's a very, and yet very debilitating disease, because essentially it makes your red blood cells, which carry oxygen, become sticky. Then you block blood flow and cutting off oxygen supply, especially to the brain, leading to cerebral malaria, which is which is often fatal. So it's a very bad disease. And in Limpopo, we don't have a big problem, but we should always remember that we do have the disease even locally here. And so Limpopo has low incidence of malaria. And so when you get the symptoms, you need to be alert that it could be malaria, actually,
Yeah, absolutely understandable. I did get a chance to look into, some of the reflection that the students after your presentation in California shared. Interestingly, so many people spoke about more about your story and less about the science aspect of it. And one student even wrote that, your story showed that becoming as a scientist actually requires you to be a persistent person, not just smart, very smart or intelligent. And another person spoke about how inspiring it was to see someone from a rural African background, become an internationally recognized scholar. Why do you think that aspect of your story resonated so strongly with them?
I think it's simply because the US for a long time through technology has become a place of fair comfort. I was quite impressed that when it's cold, the heating system is on. When it gets hot, the air conditioning is on. Even on the bus, right?
Yeah.
So this is a community that has gotten used to comfort, and of course they have their own struggles.
Yeah.
But I think someone from Africa sharing a story in the US about their how they manage adversity and challenge is a story that is going to inspire the community that side, because although they have their own struggles, they probably realize my struggles are nothing compared to what someone is overcoming out there. Let me just get out and get things done. So I think that is why it resonated with this with the community that I shared my experience with.
Yeah, several students also shared that, your presentation changed how they view science in Africa. What is it that you wish the world would understand about African scientists or science in Africa and also African research institutions?
I think if I'm going to use South Africa as a reference point, one of the things that I did when I was doing my presentation was to talk about highlights of our achievements. I highlighted that we are rugby world beaters, right?
Yes.
I also touched on artists that have made a distinct global profile for themselves, from Africa. And I did also highlight about the fact that we had the first successful heart transplant in South Africa for human to human, which was done by Chris Barnard. And I think when you look overall, one of the things that perhaps people don't know is that South Africa commits so much resource in science that they also even include a program by which they rate their scientists benchmarking their scientists based on the global profiling. And South Africa has some of the best scientists in some areas, as good as it gets. And so I think what we need to realize, perhaps even before we showcase to the world, is to convince ourselves that we have something to celebrate here, so that when we go out, we know we've got a brand to sell. The science that we do, some of it is really just good. And I think this is sometimes surprising to people, that you could actually ask important questions from Africa that you want to answer and make a contribution towards within the scientific field. So I think because Africa is often cast as a place of doom, hopelessness, right? Famine, disease, and I think we need to change that narrative. And I think my effort in reaching out in the US was also in a way to change that narrative.
Yeah, I think it's very important to change the narrative that is there, because when you're right, when people think Africa, they think all things poverty, all things famine, like you mentioned. But we can agree on the fact that the American institutions did not just host you by accident. What is it that you think they saw in the work that you do and also your research, that made the collaborations, as you mentioned, the importance of collaboration in science possible?
So I think when you do your science here, like I've done over the course of time. It's just my daily responsibility to supervise my students, make sure things are done, of course, rush to a lecture. But for me, I think it takes me back, must have been 2010 when I was then at the University of Zululand, where I started my academic career. And I got a call from the editor of Nature Medicine. It's like a journal based in the United States, calling from New York to say, we have seen your research and we think it's interesting. Can we have a conversation like we are having now to discuss your work? It was then the era of your phone rings in the phone, you know that gadget. Someone's talking on the other end, and they're like, "No, we're following what you are doing." And for me, it woke up in me a sense that what we are doing is making a difference, even within this setup. And from there on, of course, I rushed to talk to my students, say, you know what, guys, we seem to be doing something the world is noticing. And so for me, I think perhaps this is, I don't know if that may have inspired, because there were a few news clips that also followed, you know. And of course, Unifen has also been doing very well to profile us. So for in terms of research, it's your publications that go out also to market you and to represent you. And so today, I think together with your CV that you deliberately assemble and present, I think these are the factors that people look at to say, could this person be a representative, you know, of the country out there to make a difference? Because I think that's essentially the point, that the Fulbright program are looking for someone who, when they go out, at least they can represent the country well.
So you mentioned supervision. On your profile, it noted that, you know, many of your students have gone on to secure international fellowships, you know, grants, and also opportunities at institutions such as Stanford, you know, and other institutions. What is your philosophy when it comes to mentoring young scientists?
So I'm very deliberate about training my students very well. And I have this philosophy that I might not be able to make a difference, you know, in science. I could make a contribution, but perhaps I might not win a Nobel Prize. But I always believe that my students could win a Nobel Prize. I see in young people a bright future, and I tell my students that, you know, I don't want you to achieve what I've achieved. If you achieve what I've achieved, you would have failed. I deliberately say to them, you are going to do better because you are essentially standing on my shoulders. Why should you attain what I've achieved? You need to do better. And so I operate from that standpoint. And when I train my students, I put them through a very rigorous process. You know, one of the when you are in an under-resourced setting like this, what you want to apply mostly is your imagination. I challenge my students to be curious, to be imaginative, and to be problem solvers. Very practical. You know, I emphasize the practical side of things. I want us to be able to solve a problem at end. So every day, when I walk in the lab, I always find a student as a question to ask. And that person could spark a long conversation talking about a whole lot of other issues around their project. So it is sparking curiosity and to challenge the students. By the way, I believe students are still fairly healthy people that could do with a bit of challenge, right? So I don't apologize for challenging them.
No, absolutely understandable. You have supervised students that are, you know, themselves, they're making marks in different institutions and also internationally. What would you say gives you the greatest satisfaction? You seeing them graduate, them publishing, or them surpassing you, like you just mentioned, that, you know, they need to do better than you?
I've already seen students that have done way better than me, that I trained. And sometimes I feel a little jealous, actually. I have students that are already at professorship level. I think one of the first students I co-supervised is becoming a full professor. So we are celebrating his, the inaugural lecture in August. So there are some that are already full professors, associate professors, senior lecturers, and so forth. And when I look at their research profiles, that's when I feel really like these guys are doing better than me. They're actually doing much better. So I'm very pleased with some of them. But yeah, generally they've gone on to do very well, and some even at the international platform. Like my host at Hampton University was actually my former student who did their PhD here at the University of Venda.
That's absolutely beautiful. So now I want to put you in a corner. Do you remember a particular student? Maybe you're not gonna mention names. A particular student whose journey reminded you of why you chose this profession, why you chose to be a scientist.
I think to some degree, I would say nearly, maybe most of the PhD students I've supervised have really motivated me. Or I could even, I could single out one, but to be honest, nearly all of them, including masters and so forth. The reason being that when I did my PhD at Rhodes University, I realized I mastered skills that could be useful, especially to historically disadvantaged institutions. So essentially, when students come in, or rather when I joined the University of Zululand, University of Venda, I'm probably the first person in both these institutions to bring protein research to the institutions. And to some degree, what we call molecular biology skills, almost in each time, almost setting the tone for introducing these skills. And there may have been some people that did, but I probably know little about that. I know that when I got in, there was probably no one doing much in the molecular biology aspects, protein biochemistry. And so to bring these skills to students and to see them develop, it's such a joy just to see them transform from someone who didn't have a clue about what you are talking about. I mean, the first interaction with your student could actually intimidate them because you're talking about proteins and so on. They're like, what? I don't know what these molecules are. But now you introduce this concept, let the student get established, and by they actually become able, in their development. I've taken students to conferences sometimes, and it's a master student, and people think they probably got a PhD 10 years ago. And it gives me joy just to see that development taking place for every student that comes through my hands.
So you have received numerous honors, including election as a fellow of the Royal Society of South Africa. When recognition reaches that level, what does it actually mean to you as a scientist as a whole, to be part of, such elections or such recognitions?
So for me, it's a big honor, especially for this for the Royal Society fellowship, because you don't apply for it. Someone just nominates you, and it's a colleague. And it's always humbling when someone writes you to say, would you like a nomination for this? And you say yes, and you're thinking, okay, you were thinking about me. It's I think that is the beauty of it, that it's not yours to initiate, it's someone else who initiates. And then you find yourself getting the nomination and going through the process until you are actually a member, an acknowledged member of the community. So it's always a good feeling.
So would you say recognition in a way changes you, or does it simply just affirm the work that you've already been doing?
I think it does. Of course, you don't want recognition to get your head. You're very conscious, I'm just the same. And I think one of the tragedies of human beings is to overrate ourselves. I think it's very important to remain with your feet on the ground. And to acknowledge that I'm making a contribution, but we probably make the biggest contribution together. It's not about you. But it does also help to cement confidence in you, to say, well, at least if some people think you are doing something, perhaps there's something right that you are doing. And so it's encouraging.
Understandable. Let's now come to you, Prof, the human being. So outside of science, what would you say inspires your thinking?
So I'm a Christian. I really value Christian values, and they are very important in terms of value systems. And so it's one of my reference points when I deal with matters. You know, if I don't have answers, God surely must have them. Yeah. So that's very important. It helps me manage my day because this career is quite stressful. We got on our table more than we can actually manage every day. And so that's quite important. I'm also a family person. I'm married and have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. And so these people also help me to realize that life is not about molecules in the lab. There are real issues out there. Yeah. So it's always good going back to deal with those practical aspects of the community at home, the community surrounding you, yeah. which I think helps you to recalibrate and to remain as human as you could be. Yeah. Yeah.
So what would you say a good day in Prof. Shonhai's life look like? Let's not talk the lab, let's not talk experiments, conferences, or lectures. What does a good day or a normal day in your life look like without those things?
So if I were not in the lab, I'm very outdoors. I like outdoor life. I could tell you that I have a piece of land out there that I just like being. You know, when I have time under control, dig the garden, water the garden, and that is my perfect day. I also love cycling. You know, I always keep a bike on me. And so it's my, you know, as often as I get opportunity, yeah. and I'm just cycling in the open space, it makes me feel good. It comes with consequences because once in a while, you have to do surgery because it's inevitable. Yeah. That some days some brakes fail, yeah. and you find yourself in a ditch. And at some point, I think my wife even recommended I shouldn't be cycling. Yeah. But we found a compromise. I'm still cycling. One time I actually broke my arm.
Oh, yeah. No. No, I think it's much better to stay in the lab then. Let's talk about a young person. You talked about, you know, the importance of young people actually venturing into science. If a young person is a young person in Venda, for example, that's listening to the show right now, anywhere in Africa, if that young person is specifically wondering whether someone like them could become like you, an internationally recognized scientist, what is it that you'd like them to know?
I would say they must just get out there and do it. Yeah. And I would say I actually wish I'd even started much earlier. Careers are built better if you invest in them early. Yeah. You know, I think professorship now is synonymous with gray hairs. And sometimes I think it puts off young people because yeah. they're thinking, okay, it takes me to gray before I could become a professor. Yeah. And I think it's not a perfect model of this career, right? You probably brought the wrong person to the podium right now. Yeah. I think we need to present to young people that you could be young and make a difference yeah. as a scientist. Yeah. And I think we need more and more of those young models, you know, to set the example. But be that as it may, I could say to the young person out there, make a decision to get onto this career. Yeah. It brings a lot of adventure to it. And I think if you don't want to be bored, this is the career to be. Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't want to be bored, this is the career to
Indeed.
be. Yeah. Understandable. So we talk about knowledge as something to be inherited, something to be passed on. I'd like to ask from you, what kind of academic legacy do you hope to leave, not only through your research and publication, but also through the people that you've mentored?
That's a very important question. So I think for me, especially working under resource constraints, I always say to my students, let's do the best that we can with the resources that we have. Yeah. So I believe that we could, if you are doing your PhD, you could go, some of my students have had the opportunity to go to Europe, you know, and get to see what goes on out there and bring that back. But I always say 90% of what you have to do must be done here because this is our home. Yeah. You know, find ways to use the resources that we have to answer crucial questions. Yeah. So I always emphasize that solutions that we need are not out there. They are here. Use the resources that we have to answer the questions that are important for the community that we serve.
Yeah, absolutely understandable. I think in closing, I'd like you to leave a message to fellow, more importantly, young scientists out there with regards to, I can say that, you'll tell me if you agree with me or not, there is a gap or there is a need for more scientists or more young scientists to actually come into the space. What is it that you'd like to say to aspiring scientists or, learners in high school that you'd like to recruit to the science side?
Yes, I would say I'm glad that you talk about learners out there, especially in high school. I would say, trust us. We are right here at Univen, and sometimes it appears like good science is happening out there in UCT, maybe at Oxford, yes, but it's also happening here. And I think if you could not go to Oxford, you could still come to University of Venda and develop your skills. And I think just looking at the track record, and I joined the University of Venda some 12 years ago, I can testify to the fact that I've only seen an upward trajectory. Things are changing. We're building critical mass in terms of professors that could guide young people to develop their career. Doors are opening for international collaborations. So I would say to someone young out there, if you can't go to Stellenbosch, if you can't go to UCT, you could still come here and of course choose your supervisor carefully. Look up your supervisor, see if this is someone from whom you could learn something. We don't mind being put to scrutiny, right? Yeah, just look us up, Google, and say what have they been doing. And if we have been doing something that can relate to you, probably I could be the right supervisor for you. So that is essentially the criteria. Don't go choose your mentor. Be deliberate about it. Let it be someone from whom you could learn something.
I think importantly, it would be unfair if I let you leave without, just briefly touching on the importance of collaboration. You did mention that, there are people that, you've worked with and that, young scientists should collaborate and, extend the olive branch to other people. In closing, with regards to the issue of collaboration, what is it that you'd like to say?
So collaboration is a very important aspect in the field of science because science essentially knows no borders. Malaria doesn't have a border, proteins don't have borders. So when we ask a question in this setting, it probably applies across other countries. And so you naturally want to maximize on resources by sharing resources, that you can share so that you answer crucial questions together. And this includes also your sense of imagination. But I want to emphasize that we have seen in the past a lot of collaborations between the North and the Southern partners that sometimes that are not equal. I think it's where you got someone coming to you because they want to exploit your resources. For example, in Africa, we have a diverse range of infectious diseases. Someone wants to come to Africa, collaborate with you because they want to access your resources that you can get from the community, which is okay. But I think it's important to negotiate and say, what is in there for me as well? And I think it's important for us as Africans, to start collaborating on equal basis with our partners. Go out there with your ideas. It can't be just someone brings an idea and you want to ride on it and they own the idea. Then in that case, that's unfair. It's not a collaboration that is fair. I think it's important for us to become equal. Let it not be just about someone approaching us. Let's also be approaching them to say, I got this idea, let's work together. So that you bring ideas either way, so that it's not about someone exploiting the other. That's very important.
Prof, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for coming to the show. I think that's just how we are going to close it. Thank you so much for tuning in on the episode. I think my takeaway from the episode is that there is a need for us to change the narrative of Africa. Let's continue to be curious young people and let's do the best that we can with the resources that we have. Until we meet again next time, thank you.